The Old Testament begins with the words, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." But in Genesis 12, the Old Testament becomes the story of Abraham and God's three great promises to Abraham: that he would bless him and make him a great nation, that that nation would receive the promised land, and that ultimately through one of Abraham's descendants, God would bless all mankind through the Messiah. Abraham spent most of his life as a Bedouin, wandering with his flocks in the hill country of Judea, 40 or 50 miles south of Jerusalem. He grew up in Ur of the Chaldees, 1,000 miles to the east of here. But God called him, "Go into the land that I will show you." And it was this land, the hill country around Hebron and Beersheba. But on at least two occasions, Abraham visited the area of Jerusalem. The first time was when he met Melchizedek. Melchizedek was king of Salem, and the town was located in those days on Mount Ophel, just south of today's walled city. Many years later, God brought Abraham back to the land of Moriah, and Elias Suba recalls what happened.
I can assure you we are on Mount Moriah. And Moriah means the chosen place, connected with our great father Abraham. I don't believe anybody will do as Abraham did, bringing his only child from Beersheba, which is about 55 miles south of here, to sacrifice him on the summit of Moriah.
But the father of the faithful spent most of his life in less dramatic ways. He was a shepherd. He lived in tents and followed his flocks. In time of famine, according to Genesis 12, Abraham and Sarah went down into Egypt. They would have followed an ancient road called the Way of the Sea. That road still winds through the hills of Judea and is still traveled today. It's hard to realize that the wonders of Egypt, the pyramids and the Sphinx, were already nearly 1,000 years old when Abraham went to Egypt in search of food. Who knows? Perhaps Abraham and Sarah gazed in wonder at the pyramids, just as modern tourists do. After the famine was over, Abraham returned to the hills of Judea and to the Bedouin way of life. God blessed Abraham, and the Bible says he became a wealthy man, but his wealth was in his flocks. He lived in tents, wandered with his flocks, and never owned any land. When his beloved Sarah died, Abraham had no burial place, so he bought the cave of Machpelah from Ephron the Hittite for a family tomb. The tomb of the patriarchs is built over the cave of Machpelah. When Sarah died, Abraham purchased the cave of Machpelah from Ephron the Hittite. Sarah was buried here in the cave, later Abraham, then Isaac and Rebekah, later Jacob and Leah. Just before the birth of Jesus, Herod the Great built the great walls that you see. They're Herodian, going back to the 1st century. Later in Crusader days, it became a church. No one is able to visit the cave beneath this building now, but underneath this building in the cave of Machpelah, there is buried Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob. Notice the beautiful Herodian stones with the beveled edges. These walls were built by Herod the Great 20 or 30 years before Jesus was born. Herod was such a builder that we see stones like these all over the Bible land. There are many scenes in the Bible land today that are reminiscent of the days of Abraham and Sarah. The sheep still graze on the hills around Hebron. The Arab women still wear the beautiful old dresses, and they carry their shopping baskets or water jars on their heads. These dresses are embroidered by hand, and each village has its own distinctive style, like this beautiful dress that came from a little Arab village in the Galilee. The shepherds still wash their sheep before they shear them. These shepherd boys have brought their sheep all the way from Tekoa to Jerusalem because there's a pool here. The water comes from the Gihon spring. This spring was flowing in the days of Abraham. It provided a water supply for Jerusalem, and it's still flowing today. Some of these sheep aren't too happy about getting a bath, and some of them are about as big as the shepherd boys. But from the days of Abraham, from the days of David, this is what shepherd boys have done. Abraham lived nearly 4,000 years ago, but among the Arabs on the West Bank today, there are Bedouin families whose way of life hasn't changed very much. Here's a Bedouin family that lives in the Jordan Valley west of Jericho. They have a goat's hair tent with a dirt floor. Their wealth is counted in goats and sheep. The old man's about 80. His face shows the years that he spent out in the sun. He knows little about the modern world. No electricity, no running water, no bathroom, no doctors or nurses.
والله هناك الحمد لله متريحين.
يعني مستورة.
لا في نعمة كده.
He has grandchildren, and they're playing around the tent, some of them without too many clothes or too many baths. His wife wears typical Bedouin dress. She has the grandchildren around her, and she's rocking the youngest in a swing. He smiles, and he doesn't seem to mind the flies, at least not as much as we do. A Bedouin family in the Bible land today. But as you look at this face, you might be seeing the face of Abraham. Elias Suba comes from the Tamara Bedouin tribe. He grew up as a shepherd boy at Bethlehem.
I'm proud of those nomads because our great father Abraham was of one of them. Now those nomads, they never settle in a place. They keep following water and grass. They're black tents. They're hand woven out of goat's hair. They are very generous people, very honest people too, do believe me? Suppose a strange lady getting into one of those Bedouin tents and want to spend a night. I have seen this in my own eyes, that the host will stick his knife next to her bed. That means she's protected, will be no harm. So those nomads living the same way as our great father Abraham. Now move one of them to the Intercontinental or Holiday Inn, he will tell you, please leave me alone, take me back to my tent. And the average of life among them over 100 years.
Here's another Bedouin man in a better tent who plays on a primitive one-string instrument. And he even makes a melody on a coffee mill. As Elias said, the Bedouin are hospitable people. The coffee pot is always ready, but beware, it's been brewing for hours. But there are some things Abraham wouldn't recognize, like a Bedouin tent with a battery-powered television, or the camels that still graze in the desert, how they're used mainly to entertain the tourists. Shushu was a friendly camel. She gave me a bumpy ride, and then a smelly kiss.